Plants, they feed the world directly, like for real. We don't have food unless some organism can make their own food from the energy of the sun. And then you've got some animal that's going to eat it, like you or me or some animal. And then we eat the animal that ate the plant. See, get where I'm going? An essential part of the food chain. Everybody's best friend is plants. And we are kind of parasites of them, in a way. But we spread them around. I mean, we are essential in feeding the world. Farmers around here kind of rely on plants. The food of the world is made, and it comes from plants. So, yes, it's an essential part of the food chain, and they're awesome. Let's take a look at our phylogenetic tree of life. They are eukaryotes. They have a nucleus. They have cell membranes and cell walls. And actually, we've learned about plant cells a little bit earlier in the class, and they are over here, one section of those eukaryotic organisms on the tree of life. Plants specifically are eukaryotic. They're multicellular. They have tissues that work with other types of cells and tissues to make the organism work, to make them go, to allow for life. Okay, so if you look at all of our eukaryotic kingdoms, groups here of different, mostly protists here, but we have fungi, we have animals, and then we do have green plants that again are a huge part of our world. If you split up plants, it's pretty cool how through time different types of plants have arisen and dominated. And some of the earliest forms of plants are still part of our world. Some of them are not. Some of them are extinct. But at different times over the past billion years or so, plants have changed quite a bit, or at least the abundance of those plants have changed. So we're going to take a look at most plants and types of plants in that way. What were the first plants, and then what are the plants that dominate today in recent times? Some of these plants and trees, some of the trees out in the Sequoia National Forest out on the west coast are just ginormous. They're gigantic. This is a profile of the president, this tree is called. And if you want to take a look at that, there's a link below this video that details just the enormity of that tree. Okay, let's take a look at characteristics of all plants. We've already mentioned they're eukaryotic. They have nuclei in their cells. They have membrane-bound organelles. They're autotrophic. They make their own food from sunlight, most of them, and they are, so in that way, they are photosynthetic. They take in CO2, they take in sunlight, they take in water, and they make food out of it and give off oxygen as a result too. Their cell walls are made of something different than other cell walls. It's made of cellulose, which can be a tough material to digest. Certain organisms do better with that than others, but yeah, they have cell walls with cellulose. They're multicellular. They have tissues, and we'll learn about those different types of tissues and different parts of plants in a little minute. Embryophytes. They have a protected embryo that will grow and develop into a more mature plant. So this is kind of new for plants. Many of these plants exhibit an alternation of generations. And this picture to the right showing how this works with ferns gives you a good idea of what's happening. If you start with just basically like the sex cells, these spores will develop into the gametophyte, which has half the genetic information that the diploid generation would have. So in this 1N stage, this haploid stage, we have the development of sex cells, male gametes, usually in the form of pollen, and then female gametes, or the ovule or the egg, will develop. Soon enough, the male and the female gametes do come together during fertilization. At that point, you have double the amount of DNA, 2N. It's the diploid generation. This is, in most plants, the mature stage of that plant's life. When you think of a full-grown plant, you think of that sporophyte stage, that diploid generation. So then it undergoes meiosis to make the sex cells once again, and it goes through that alternation of generations. Happens differently with some plants as compared to others, but this is new. All right, let's take a look at how land plants have evolved over time. First, we're going to take a look at terrestrial plants. If I say terrestrial, it means on land. So the first plants to migrate to land were these. They're called bryophytes, and examples include liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. These are still around. They're really simple. They don't have any vascular tissue. They rely instead on diffusion to move water around. So they're not going to grow to be very tall, because it would be impossible for these plants to get water to the tall part of that plant. They can't make that work. Instead, they have to get water directly, or diffusion, to move the water through those cells that make up these bryophytes, the simplest land plants that started this all. Okay, so our first land plants are bryophytes. So we're going to have that picture here and refer to that later as well. The next move for terrestrial plants was to develop tissues like xylem and phloem. These plants are called vascular seedless plants, and the common name for them are ferns. Now these ferns can get a lot bigger because they have these water-carrying tubes called xylem and the food or sugar-carrying tissues called phloem. You can see a picture of those things here, and the next slide might include an even closer look at it. But this is new. You have xylem, which runs the length of that plant, and xylem always transports water in one direction. This water is needed at the leaf. So this leaf needs water for photosynthesis to take place. Xylem is going to take that water all the way from the root all the way to the leaf so that it can be used to make food. The phloem is the kind of tissue, you can think of it like veins and arteries kind of, only these are going to transport, instead of blood, water and sugar. But the phloem is going to transport food or sugar to wherever it's needed on the plant so that it can be used. Alright, so these are ferns, and the first ferns were the first ones with vascular tissue. Alright, so that's a big step up here. So now we have land plants, and now we've developed the ability to grow a lot taller with the use of xylem and phloem, the vascular tissues of these first seedless fern plants. The next evolutionary step was to develop seeds, and the first ones to do that are called Gymnosperms, which literally translates to naked seed. So this is these organisms are the pine trees. The Gymnosperms, conifers would include those evergreens. Cycads, ginkgos, and neophytes are lesser well known Gymnosperms, but basically these Gymnosperms were the first to have seeds, and here you can kind of look through the cycle of life for an evergreen. You've got let's start here. You have an egg, and then the egg gets fertilized by pollen. The seed develops, and it's uncovered. It's not protected necessarily, but eventually the mature seeds will go into the ground, and and you have a young evergreen plant that grows and develops the ability through meiosis to have male sex cells, pollen, and the female cone will have the egg inside of it. So when fertilization happens, you have a mature seed. That seed gets dropped, and we go through the cycle again. These are the first plants to do this. So now we've had land plants, ferns that have vascular tissue. Gymnosperms have that vascular tissue as well, but now they have the ability to have seeds and to reproduce in a different way. The next step is to have flowering plants. These flowering plants are called angiosperms. Okay, these are the flowering plants. They co-evolved with insects for reproductive purposes, really. You start to develop petals on flowers and fruit that are good advertisers to animals that can help, such as insects, that can help it reproduce. Take pollen from one place, from one plant to another where the egg awaits. So you can really change things and reproduce, and these angiosperms now dominate the world. They grow in many different places, and there's obviously a diverse range of kinds of angiosperm plants too. But these are the ones that are flowering plants. We're going to do a gizmo during this unit that really focuses in on the flower structure and where the pollen comes from and how it gets to the ovule. But for now, I want you to know that the male sex cell would be on the end of this anther, and then eventually, if it's self-pollination, the pollen will go to this style, the stigma and the style, and eventually get to the ovule while you're inside the ovary, and that pollen will fertilize this, and then that's when fruit begins to grow with seeds that are fertilized. So basically the male part gets to the female part, much like we learned during human body reproductive systems, but this is different with plants. They can be self-pollinators or cross-pollinators, so this pollen could use an insect or some other animal like a bat to take that pollen from one flower to another flower to fertilize there. Alright, this is a really cool video showing why plants would have fruit. It's called The Sneaky Reason Why Plants Bear Fleshy Fruit. It's basically so that animals can transport the fertilized seed to a new place. So here's our full look at the evolution of land plants from the first to the ones that dominate today. The last slide includes a couple of structures that I'd like you to know about. One is the cuticle. This is a thin waxy layer on the leaf that helps prevent water loss. This is really advantageous for a plant. They need water, and they need to conserve it all they can so that all of that can be used for photosynthesis. The other structural part that I'd like you to know about is the stomata. This is the tiny opening on the leaf where gas exchange takes place. This is where CO2 can go in, and then oxygen is given off here. So after photosynthesis, we have oxygen, and it leaves through the stomata just as the CO2 comes in. So that is plants. Adios.